All right, welcome everybody. Good afternoon or good morning, whatever it is for you. And welcome to this Civilian and Police Lives Matter debate. I'm Owen Crew, and our debaters are Tyree Bell, a Black Democrat, and Sherman Grant, a Black Republican. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hello.
So the question these men will be debating today is, should the protests over police brutality continue? Protests that began in early May have spread across the U.S. and continue to escalate in some places. The Black Lives Matter movement that began in 2012 has achieved a previously unprecedented level of popular support, and the use of the Black Lives Matter hashtag is becoming for many a statement of support for the movement. Alleged vigilante killings of Black people continue to be a concern, but police killings of Black people and of others are now the main focus. Proposed solutions to the problem range from targeted police reforms to defunding or abolishing the police to top-down transformation of the entire society of the United States. Public support of protests over police brutality peaked immediately after the death of George Floyd and before the arrest of the officers who were involved. The public benefit to be achieved by continued protests is now less clear, and violent confrontations taking place between protesters and police and involving innocent bystanders are a continuing threat and source of controversy. These protests are taking place in the context of increasing confrontation between the US and the world's other great powers. Communist China and autocratic Russia are beginning to cooperate closely as both challenge the liberal United States. The rivalry is played out in both domestic and foreign policy as China and Russia experience major protests of their own over domestic issues. Our debaters today will be weighing the risks and benefits of continuing the protests. Tyree will argue that argue that peaceful protests should continue, and Sherman will argue that the protests should end immediately. In the first half of the debate, they'll present their opening arguments and answer questions. After a brief break, they will have a period of discussion in which they'll have the opportunity to ask each other questions, and each will then present closing arguments. So, our first question, and this, I'll let Tyree answer this first, and then, no, I'm sorry. Opening statements. Tyree, if you would go first.
Okay. My feeling about this is I think the protests should be continued because, like anything, when you're talking about, excuse me, when you're talking about equal rights and police brutality, especially against people of color, you need to get the attention. A peaceful protest does that. It's not convenient. No one really does a convenient protest, you know, when it's set on your schedule, when it doesn't inconvenience you. It's done when it inconveniences lots of people, you know, with the blocking of the highways or intersections. Yes, it's inconvenient, but the reason that's happening is because it's a feeling of not being heard. In my opinion, it's like when you have a 5-year-old and they're tugging on you, say, hey, dad, 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 and then they scream. That's because they felt they haven't been heard. When you're talking about police brutality, inequality, the type of things that are happening, that have been going on for decades, you're speaking of the same type of things as not being heard. So protest, and I mean peaceful protest, is the way to get that information out there, and it's been working. Things have been changing. There are some renovations to police departments that are happening. There are some advancements that are being made through protests.
Okay, is that all for you?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Sherman.
Yes.
And you have,
know that.
sorry, I just want to let you know that you have up to 5 minutes if you choose to use it.
Oh, yeah, I'll be a little shorter than that.
I hope Tyree knew that.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Black Lives Matter has been around, 3 years now, and I appreciate the initial goal that it seemed like it was about police brutality and wanting to feel safe, not wanting to die and have fear. Um, but the recent protests seem to evolve way past just the police aspect. It included, all the other systemic racism systems, and included disparity in housing and wages. So now this one thing that was kind of focused on the police part expands out to the point where it's hard to ever reach the goals aimed at, since the goals have increased so much. Like Tyree mentioned, there have been some moves to reallocate funds and to get more accountability for police officers. So positive moves have been made, but what bothers me is that the negative things that have happened kind of get ignored. Like, it's not just the inconvenience of, oh, your highway blocked, your street blocked. It's people have died at these protests, not just by the hands of the officers. Protesters have shot wildly and shot other protesters or innocent bystanders. They shot at people who they thought were against their cause. So even if we keep saying, yes, that part isn't what we want the peaceful part, you have to acknowledge that almost 50 days now, continuous protesting. People have died. People have lost loved ones. You cannot just explain to that person, especially the more latest one, where an 8-year-old girl was killed. It's not exactly proven that it was by a protester, but it was in the same environment that was started by the protest, that we need to stand up and fight. And now we're going to have casualties from that. So I'm all for peaceful blocking streets. We get a fine, that's fine, but people have literally lost their lives. And that's the part that I hate. And I want it all to stop, all the peaceful and the non-peaceful protests, so that we can recalibrate and get a better way of approaching it. Because as long as these peaceful protests are going on, there are going to be people, the rioters, the looters, the vandalizers that hide in the crowd and get away with their evil intent.
Are you finished?
Yes.
Okay. And Tyree, just wanted to confirm that that was all that you had to say for your opening statement?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you, gentlemen, for explaining where you are on that. And now we'll have 2 minutes each for you to answer the questions. So let's see. All right. So I'm gonna let Tyree answer this question first, and then turn it over to Sherman to answer. I would like to, you touched on this some in your, I think, in your introductions, your opening statements, but I'd like you to focus in particular on the need for the current protests when they began. We're talking here, I guess you could really focus on either on the Black Lives Matter movement or on this most recent round of protests that began about late May and leading up to the death of George Floyd. So why, let me put it this way, why do you believe that the current protests were needed when they began specifically?
Well, the reason that I believe that is that there have been videos of police brutality before, but what was happening is that there's not much accountability for it. You have you have the one instance, the one that I personally saw, where you have an officer shoot someone in the head, and there was nothing, he was not held accountable for that. And we're talking about things like tickets. So when you talk about the video, what made the George Floyd video so energized is the fact that we actually saw 9 minutes of someone being killed. And those officers in the beginning were not being held accountable for, oh, well, we just killed somebody. That's fine. But we watched that 9 minutes kneeling on this guy's neck. Now we've got the protests out there, which started out peaceful. But in my opinion, you know, I don't agree with the violence, but a kicked dog will eventually bite you.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt that what was happening is that the protests are going, people are still, you know, experiencing police brutality, and most are not being held accountable. The police are still being let go.
Okay.
And I don't believe every police officer is bad.
All right, thank you. Sherman, why do you believe that protests were initially needed?
I do believe they were initially needed because it was one of the most hideous videos out there. To literally have this guy, you know, pleading for his life, bystanders begging for them to get off of him, and to show such a callous, like a lack of, you know, empathy for this man's life. Yeah, it was atrocious. What amazes me though is no one came out saying that what happened was justified or well, he was resistant. Who cares? It was like basically everyone came out and said, yeah, that was wrong. Like there was no debate on whether these people should be in trouble for what they did. No one's coming to bat saying, oh, the cops were good and did what they needed to do. Most people, I haven't heard anyone actually say, oh, well, you know, the cops are just doing their job. This is one of the very rare instances where we seem to all be on the same page. But for some reason, the protests come out and they act like they're fighting against that, you know, the public. No, the public on their side. I do agree with the idea that we go after the police, like the law enforcement, you know, people in charge, or who didn't initially say, wait, this is wrong. It took these protests to say, hey, you should probably charge these people. And then I like that it went back to a few other cases where it's like, wait, Breonna Taylor, how she was killed. It's like, wait, and the guy didn't get charged. Like, there does need to be accountability. So I do appreciate that the protest started over that. But what I don't like is that there's this what's the name? I like the protest, but I don't like, oh, that's what it was. He said, Tyree mentioned that it started off peaceful. It really didn't. It's the minute that they were mad about this George Floyd killing, we immediately saw Target was looted and AutoZone vandalized, burnt down. Like the violence was included and vandalism was included from the start. And we've seen it go up and down over these last 50 days or so, but it's not fair to say that it started peaceful. It really did start with anger. And even if you want to justify lashing out that it's justified from how they felt, frustration, I still have to call out that it was violent from the beginning.
Okay. So, looks like I got multiple timers going on here. Sorry about that. All right, so we've talked about why the protests were needed initially, and it seems like you're both on the same page about accountability, the need for accountability. There was none there. So, Tyree, I guess I'd like to rework the second question I had in mind. Tyree, why do you believe that that how do I put this? Why do you believe that there is not that need for accountability is still a current issue to the protests need to continue?
Well, the reason I feel that is because there has been some changes, but it took a public outcry.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes a public outcry to hold the officers responsible, to hold them responsible for what happened. I'm not just speaking of with George Floyd or Richard. I'm speaking of many instances where there's some type of violence and they are chosen as, well, they do say that. They say the police officer was doing his job. They shouldn't have been resisting. As mentioned, I actually hear that a lot. Well, if they had not resisted, if they hadn't done this, if they hadn't done that. But what I tend to see is that it's a lot of just police brutality. And with that, even now, it's still not being, in my opinion, still not being addressed enough. There's still things that are happening where the police are getting away with it. And again, it's not every police officer, but there's certain officers who will do something. Like I just saw a video not that long ago where an officer assaulted a 14-year-old girl because she was being a little bit unruly. You know, he's grabbing her, throwing her to the ground. So far, to my knowledge, he hasn't been. This issue hasn't been addressed yet, and that's current. So that's why I feel that
Okay, thank you. So Sherman, on the flip side, why do you believe that the need for accountability now is not, that it does not have the same level of justification for continued protests that it had at the beginning?
Right. Like we said, we agree that accountability is important. Like there's countless videos of cops getting away with brutality and in the worst case scenario, killing somebody. So of course, all of those get called out, and sometimes, you know, justice is served, other times not so much. But the problem is, justice is asked to be served in every case dealing with the Black person. Like the latest one here in Detroit, a guy literally shot at the cop point blank, somehow missed, and then when the cops shoot him dead, protesters say, "Oh my God, cops killing us out here." Even when the exact scenario where you would think it's a justified killing, you tried to kill a cop, literally on video, shot at him. Protesters still demanded justice and wanted the cop fired and wanted them charged with murder. If that's the case, then there's nothing a cop can do without getting this kind of treatment or demanding some kind of consequence, even when his life is threatened directly. So it'll also apply to lower stuff. If someone just robbed a store and they try to arrest them, if they're not completely gentle, if they make a mistake and bump their head, oh my God, police brutality. I don't want it to be pushed too far in the other direction to where now cops say, forget it, I won't show up. And we're already seeing that. When you call for certain crimes in certain areas, it's like, sorry, let us know when the person is left. Because if they show up, they try to arrest the person. If it goes wrong in the slightest, someone has a camera on, then they're out of a job. They're in jail for doing what they're supposed to do, what they were called to do. So yes, of course we need to call out every bad actor. And like Tyree said, not all of them are bad. But what I see and what I'm fearful will have to continue to happen, the good cop doing the right thing will still be cried, oh, police brutality, and then they'll get fired as well.
Thank you. And this question is going to be for both of you. So do you believe that the protests have been mainly peaceful? And following up to that, if you wouldn't mind answering two questions at once, how important is it for protests to be peaceful? Tyree, I'll let you go first.
Okay. I think they mostly have been peaceful. My daughter actually has participated in the protests. And from what she is telling me in the video she showed me, it has been peaceful. People are marching. They're actually wearing masks as well, distancing, and they're staying on topic. Like Sherman says, I don't agree with the violence either. I don't agree with that. I do know that I do agree that police have a tough time. So, but I still believe that there should be some accountability for that. You can't justify, I can't say, hey, you shoot at the police officer and he shoots you, that's police brutality. That's not. That's police officer defending himself and doing his job.
Is that all?
That was it.
Okay, thank you. Sherman, have the protests been mostly peaceful, and how important is it for the protests to be peaceful?
I feel like they definitely have been mostly peaceful. Just like anything, something can be current, like going smoothly 90% of the time, but it's that 10% when things are crazy. So we don't see all the peacefulness, but we definitely see every time there's, violence or vandalism and stuff like that. So I will go ahead and agree. Yes, they have been mostly violent. I mean, mostly peaceful, sorry. But what a small problem is though, that when the violence does come up, I hear two things. I hear either, hey, don't worry about that because it doesn't represent the whole group, or I hear, and that we're not responsible for it, or I hear, well, you shouldn't be worried about material things because we're fighting for the lives that are lost and things like that. So I would like it that if we get on the same page and all call it out, and maybe try to separate from the violent protesters and vandalizers more, because the peaceful protesters are there and they'll see the people doing the wrong, but won't tell anybody. And I guess that kind of defeats the whole, we're out here protesting against the cops. Then how do you then call the cops to rat someone out? But I do want to see more of a call out of that. If we're all on the same page that it's wrong and we want the peaceful stuff, then we should be all calling out the part that's not peaceful. And yes, it's super important to be peaceful mostly and almost all if you can, entirely if you can, because the violence, even if people feel it's justified, frustration, not being heard for all these years, you lose more support when you do the violent way. People either gonna run away from the movement or they're only gonna support it out of fear, not empathy or feeling a cause.
Thank you. All right, next question. For Tyree, this is for both of you, but I'll let Tyree answer first. Which, if any, of the protesters' current goals do you support? Specific goals.
The one goal I support, I think they're using the wrong phrasing when they say defund the police. In my opinion, I think it's more of a is reallocation of funds. For additional training, sensitivity training, maybe even some submission training, and more de-escalation training. I could see that, and I would rather them demilitarize. I personally don't see why the police officers have to have military equipment when dealing with the public. To me, that's more of an issue as far as striking fear into the population. You show up, the body armor I'm good with, but when you show up and you've got a battering ram that's attached to a tank, you've got all this type of military gear, then that tells me you've already prepared to do what you're going to do. So that's the one thing I support. Reallocating the funds, demilitarizing the police officers, and giving them additional training.
Okay, and training.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Thank you, Tyree. Sherman, which goals do you support?
Yeah, the training part, I like. Can never get too much training. So learning to de-escalate, how to handle different situations, I like that. The one I like, I don't know if I've heard it as much. Well, it's a general thing, but I think there should be cameras, like a law that says every cop has to have a camera working at all times. And if for some reason it's not working conveniently or turned off, there should be some kind of penalty for that. Because we only know about the George Floyd because a bystander happened to have the camera rolling, and then a security cam nearby from the business. So I want it for both, not just for, the people, assaulted by the police, but also to defend the police. Because like even with the Detroit instance, when it first happened, people were shouting, "Oh my God, the cops just killed this guy!" But then they immediately released the footage, and you see, "Oh wait, he shot at the cops first." So that camera being on cops at all times to protect the people and the cops, and we can sort things out way easier than just a word of mouth, he said, she said type of situation. So I definitely want cameras on all times, penalty of law if we don't have them on.
Thank you. Next question. Which of the protesters' current goals do you oppose or not support? Tyree.
Well, if they actually mean the defund the police, I can't support that. I don't think that's the right way to go, because there's a reason we have police. We do need them. And I would hate to be in a situation where I need a police officer and there's no one coming. So I don't agree with that. Anyone that's saying that there needs to be violence out, I definitely don't agree with that.
Okay.
Oh, and I wanted to address what Sherman has spoke about the cameras.
Mhm.
I very much agree with that. I very much agree that there should be that police officers should have body cams that they cannot turn off easily, and if they do have it or claim the batteries died or something, then they should be held accountable for why that's going on.
Thank you. And Sherman, which goals do you not support, or which goals do you oppose?
Yeah, the biggest one is, like he said, defend the police, defund the police. Like some people out here say, no, that means reallocate, like Tyree was saying. Like, I know New York cut like $1 billion from their police force. They're gonna move it to, I guess, social programs or whatever else. And it sounds good on paper, but we already hear that cops already struggle for funding, and already, I mean, especially with all this going on, morale is probably quite low. And now you're saying cutting their funds more. It's like, we do, like Tyree said, need a police force. I'm gonna focus more on weeding out the bad cops through, cameras and reports. Like, I know one thing I heard was that we need to stop it where allowing cops to keep their job by just moving to another department. So they mess up here in this town, did something horrendous. They just get moved to another department, across town, and it's like they didn't do what they did before. So we need to make sure that their history is accounted for, so we don't find out that they've had so many instances of police brutality, and oops, now it led to them killing somebody. Because I believe that was the case with the George Floyd guy. But so yeah, definitely don't agree with the defund if it means for real defund, and even the allocate is a little shaky to me. But also, I just read an article about how they want to make it easier to sue police officers, where you know the police officer does something that you deem, police brutality or a little too much, and now cops don't have the type of protections that they have. So now, I mean, that sounds good on paper for sure, but again, now it's going to lead to cops just saying, well, then I'd rather not show up at all, because even if you do everything right, all it takes is them claiming, that you made them bump their head entering the car, and now they get to sue you, and now they gotta face a fine and possibly jail time, lose their job, all while just trying to protect and serve. So I think that would lead to more and more people either, leaving the force and not wanting to ever become a cop in the first place. So I want to be real careful about the types of laws that they're trying to pass and get rid of.
Thank you. I have some good news. I just got a message saying that our 40-minute time limit has been removed. So if you want to, I'm not finished with questions yet, but when we finish, if you want to go ahead without a break, we can do that. It's something you can think about whether you want to do. The next question I have is, do you think that the protests, let me rephrase this. How do you think that the protests lead to needed or worthwhile conversations, if you believe that they do? Tyree.
Do you lead to more worthwhile conversation?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
So I understand that you believe they do, and that's that's a very that's one of your main points. But could you say a little bit about how you believe they lead to that?
Well, I think what it tends to do when it comes to protesting, it forces the uncomfortable conversation just by it being the protest, because now there are questions that need to be addressed. Because people, to be honest, people really don't like to talk about race especially when you're talking about having a non-confrontational conversation about it. The protest tends to be a bridge to have that type of conversation. No, it's not comfortable, but it works as far as at least getting it out there. You know, I have some friends actually ask me, well, why do you feel this way when it comes to the police? Why do you feel it's not equal? Why do you feel uncomfortable when you're pulled over by a police officer? Why do you feel you have to do this or you can't do that when it comes to dealing with the police? So the protest allows that type of conversation to go forward, in my opinion.
Thank you. And Sherman, do you agree that the protests lead to needed or worthwhile conversations? And if so, how does it do that? How do they do that?
Yeah, they do. They have, like, I've never seen so many companies come out to support Black Lives Matter. I mean, Nickelodeon, like the cartoon shows have it all in there, video games, like so many people are trying to show support, and I've even seen a lot of them give money, pledge, millions of dollars to better the lives of Blacks and fight police brutality and racism. So even though I don't agree with all of the things that this protest has, brought about and sparked, the conversation definitely have been increased because of it. And I've seen some legitimate, positive changes here and there. So I do appreciate that part of it.
Okay. And did you want to take the remainder of your time to say anything about how you think it is detracting from needed conversations now, or how other means would be more effective in facilitating needed or worthwhile conversations right now?
I guess the part that I don't like about the protest is that, like I said, the goals of the protests have exploded into all these different directions, and it's like it's almost purposely set up to where you can't really achieve it. Like, if you say you want to end police brutality, okay, we can make all these laws, which we already have so many laws on books as is. We can try to have more accountability, do the camera thing, defund, demilitarize, but there's still no promise because it's still a bunch of humans that are going to make mistakes, that are going to have evil intent in their heart. We can never 100% weed out all the bad cops. So if we're going to keep protesting until they're all gone, and we're never going to stop protesting, and especially when they broaden it out to we want to live, in a less racist country, like we definitely can't guarantee that. So my problem is it shouldn't be such a focus on feel-good ideas that we know are intangible. It should be narrow focus on, okay, what law do you want to see passed that would help with the goal that you're so concerned about? So that's the real conversation I want to have. Tangible things we can do, not just goals that we know we can't really reach.
Very good, thank you. All right, I guess I think we have maybe time for one more question. You mentioned, Tyree mentioned the conversation being uncomfortable and how the protests force us to have those conversations. And I get the questions I have for both of you. Do you think that the conversations that the protests provoke are uncomfortable, and should they be? I'll let you answer that first, Tyree.
Yes, and they should be. The reason that is because in the beginning of the protests, actually at the beginning of Black Lives Matter, people were asking questions like, why do we need to have that? I don't see, I've had friends who have actually said to me, well, I don't really see what you mean. I don't see what you're talking about. Everything seems equal to me. and I have to have the conversation to explain why I feel that way. A few years ago, I gave a talk at my church, and I had to explain to them that, and it was very uncomfortable. I explained to them, I said, I've been going to this church for 4 years, and I had one member not know my name. And they were speaking to me because at the church I was going to, there are 2 Black people, me and one other guy. We look nothing alike. She spoke to me as if she was speaking to the other guy. And I'm like, we've been here for 4 years already. You still don't know who I am. That's what I mean by uncomfortable conversation. Or instances where when, friends say, well, what do you mean you're nervous? I said, because my chances of surviving a interaction with the police tends to be kind of low, regardless of what I'm doing. And I have that conversation where they talk to me about, well, when you encounter the police, if you just comply, I'm like, well, people were complaining, they were still getting shot. So that's uncomfortable. The relationships between different people are also uncomfortable because it just is. Most people don't like to talk about it because their response is either, I don't see color, or I have a Black friend, so this way I know there's not a problem because I have that one Black friend. That's why I think it's uncomfortable.
All right. And now to you, Sherman. Do you think that the conversations provoked by the protests are uncomfortable, and should they be?
Yeah, they are pretty uncomfortable. Race, always that was race, politics, and religion can be pretty uncomfortable conversations. But not only, but I feel like it's not just uncomfortable because I'm a white person trying to talk to a Black person, and it's like, oh, how do you know anything about what I go through? It's also uncomfortable because there's only one way to think about this whole situation. Like Kyrie was bringing up, where someone might say, well, I don't see it as bad as you do. Then that's automatically, well, you're wrong. Like if we're not on the same page as to what exists, like what the problem is and what solutions are for it, it's very hard to have a conversation. It becomes I'm telling you what needs to be done, and if you don't agree, you're wrong. There's lack of a conversation. It's just there's already a set way that you're supposed to think, essentially, and not most of it is right. So it's like I don't agree with, like I'm not against the idea of trying to convince people, look, it's not as safe as you think it is, but I do feel like you don't want to go overboard and try to present it as every time I get stopped by a cop, 99% chance I might get shot. Like if you go too much overboard, then people say, well, I don't know if that's correct. But you do need to pull them away from the everything is so equal and peaceful. Because there is a higher risk for us than say someone else.
All right, thank you. That was all the questions that I had. There was I'll mention an audience question. I'll let you discuss it during your back and forth if you want to. Somebody asked, what does defund the police mean, and do you support or oppose that? So if you want to discuss that during your discussion time, you can. Did you want to take a break or go ahead with the next part?
Oh, I'm good.
Yeah,
We can
go ahead, go through. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I'll give you guys about 15 minutes. I think that's what we agreed to. 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And you can ask each other questions. You can respond to things that were said in the question and answer period. I'll let you go ahead. I guess let let Sherman start this off since I've been since Tyree's been going first. We'll go ahead.
All right. So I like that me and Tyree are on the same page as far as defund the police goes. We don't want the actual meaning of defund the police to mean that. Like we're both in agreement that okay, maybe you can talk about real allocation and demilitarized. I'm not too that's fine. We can agree on that. But it's scary because there are legitimate cries for getting rid of police for real, for good. Like where it happened. I forget was it Minneapolis or Memphis where George Floyd was shot, but they voted to disband the cops, the council there. So there are those who think it's a good idea to not have cops and to have, like, I guess, social workers come out to deal with certain crimes and whatnot, because, if it's mental health, you don't need somebody with a gun, or if it's just a domestic disturbance, you don't need somebody with a gun, which on paper that sounds right, but it just puts such a negative, like me and Kyrie agree that they're not all bad, but when you say, oh, we can't send someone out with a gun for anything, because what if the trigger happy and kill somebody? And it gets overhyped to where it's like every day, cops are just shooting people left and right and for no good reason. And it makes cops not want to be a cop. Like, there's been record retirements and just leaving, because it's kind of not working. I'm surprised all cops haven't really left at this point, because if you don't show up, they're mad because someone died. But if you show up and you handle the person wrong, don't even kill them. Just you arrest somebody and it's a little too rough, you're wrong for that too. So it's a really tough thing. So of course the fund is ridiculous. So hopefully they can just change that to reallocate, and I can at least get behind that a little bit.
Well, you're right. We agree on quite a few things here. The thing that I think we're kind of a little off with is the issue as far as dealing with the brutality thing. I don't, from my point of view, I don't think it's every interaction that's the issue. If you get pulled over, if someone gets pulled over by the police and they're speeding, they're in the wrong, and you can't defend that. If you're in the wrong, you're in the wrong. Just like you were speaking of the guy who had shot at the police and then the police shot back. I can't defend that, and I'm not going to try. I'm like, well, you shot the cop. What do you think? It's kind of like one of those. What do you think is going to happen? Mm-hmm. In my opinion. But I also think that there are certain techniques and things you can do that the police can do when dealing with the public in the case they have to subdue someone. I used to work at a boys' home, and I was trained and I'm a martial artist. So I know how to subdue someone that's larger than me, my size or smaller. And now, in those instances, I've never used a chokehold. I've never had to, and I've been able to take someone down by myself. So things like that, I think, are an issue. I agree with you about defunding. I think that's stupid. That's absolutely stupid. But I do agree with but I think we do agree with as far as being wanting to reallocate money, put that into other things, even dealing with the police. Because yes, I want the police to have what they need to have, but you don't need a personnel carrier to knock on somebody's door. It's not like the police are dealing with terrorists. And I know that one of the techniques the police like to use is the shock and awe. As many police show up for one person as can be, but then you have issues. And considering what we saw, when we were talking about George Floyd, and part of the reason that blew up, because then you had the thing with Ahmaud, where the two guys just shot him and said, hey, he was breaking into a house and we're doing a citizen's arrest. Mm-hmm. Which I've actually heard people say, well, if he hadn't resisted, he'd be alive. I'm like, but those weren't police officers. Brianna, she's in her house sleeping. How can she comply? And then you have the George Floyd. Those are the things that everyone is looking to is what is causing the issue. When you see the first two, that's bad enough, but then you see that long video, that's the problem. I think there's things that can be done, but to be honest, I don't know what can be done, because to me, all of this is just really systemic. They've been police officers have gotten away with killing people, actually, whether it's black or white. They've been able to get away with they're very they're able to get away with that for a long time until the invention of the camera phone. Now a lot of things are being recorded, and it's hard. Before it was like, well, when they were making the video, then they could say, hey, all you gotta do is look at the video. It's the truth. But if we take a video of an officer doing something wrong, they're like, well, you can't see all the angles, you can't deal with everything, you can't
We
see
need to
this.
investigate. Yeah. Get all the excuses in the world. Yeah, I agree with that part for sure. But yeah, so I agree with a lot of that. But then it's like, okay, like you said, it's systemic. You don't know exactly what can be done. How long do you think these protests should go on? Because it's been almost 50 days now, and we've seen some changes. We've seen some accountability, especially for the officers involved in a few of the cases. But how much longer do they need to be out there protesting?
Until the issue is resolved. I mean, Black Lives Matter is basically about, bottom line, stop killing us. That's really the bottom line of all of this. Stop killing us. Especially, like killing unarmed people, killing unarmed Black people, men, women. If they're committing a crime and that crime, it's like I was saying, if you're doing something wrong, you can't be defended. Can't say anything. But if you're not doing anything or you're complying with what the officers are saying and they beat the crap out of you or they shoot you, and then they don't get brought to justice. Just like, when we're talking about Ahmaud, you look at that, these three men chased this guy down and killed him. They went to the police company because they went to the police department. They were told, hey, don't worry about it. So they weren't even brought up on charges. No one's investigating. They just let it go until there was an outcry like, hey, how do you shoot? How do three non-police officers shoot a guy in cold blood in the street and there's no action? How do you justify that? And he was unarmed. That's what the protest is about. Stop killing us. Period.
Yeah, and that kind of goes back to what I said before, though, that you can't make that promise. You can't, because there's already laws against killing people. Cops are held accountable sometimes, even if that's not all the time, of course. But what other law can we pass? Like, stop killing us law? Like, it's already against the law. And you say it needs to keep going. The protest needs to keep going until that's accomplished somehow. We've had killings before from the cops, years ago. Of course, just last year. And Black Lives Matter come out, the protest, make all this noise. But it always went away. Like, ever since they came out, protests make a lot of noise. Eventually, they stop protesting. And yet, we still get police killings. So if the idea is we have to keep protesting until they stop killing us, it seems like the protests would have never stopped because they've never stopped killing us, which means we can never stop protesting. So I'm trying to see if there's a tangible goal to hit. Like, do you think there is one, or do you really think we just have to keep protesting forever because we know that they're not going to be able to guarantee it?
Oh, I think there's things that can be done besides protesting, but I think the protests should continue. One of the things that you do, vote. Vote.
Okay.
I know some jurisdictions where you vote in your the police chief gets voted in, or not all of them, but some of them, they have to vote that person in, or the mayor chooses that person. You communicate with, if that's the case, you communicate with the mayor. Say, hey, this guy you got in here is not working with us the way that we would like. If that conversation doesn't work, guess what? You vote that person out. Say, okay, well, obviously you don't want to do it. We need somebody in office that's looking out for us. And you vote. It's the same thing with everything, whether it's the representative, whoever you have to vote for. If they're not if they're not looking out for your goals, you vote them out. So those are some of the things that can be done. This is a toughie because of the systemic racism that's already embedded. It's already, Black people tend to already be behind the 8 ball on a lot of things. So even if it can be overt or covert, and that's where we are. What we're trying to do is we're not trying to get more than anybody else or less than anyone else. We're trying to get what everybody's getting. That's it. And when you're talking about police killing unarmed people, and that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the police who are killing the people who are unarmed, aren't resisting, or if they are resisting, if they stop, there's no reason to keep applying that pressure, because that's the way I was trained. I was trained when you subdue someone, if they stop struggling, you let up on the pressure. If you keep applying the pressure, they're going to fight more. Like if you're hurting them and you keep, just like if you stub your toe, yeah, that hurts. But if someone starts beating on your toe, you're going to complain more. So those are things that can be addressed, and that's how you can address it. Vote to deal with the politicians. They're not there, vote them out.
So do you think it's right that people who do protest, like I know, like in Portland, they've had continuous protests there a lot of vandalism, trying to set fire to buildings and all that. Nobody gets arrested for all of that. So not the peaceful protesters, the ones that are attacking people, graffitiing, trying to burn buildings. Nobody gets arrested. Do you think that's a problem? That they let the people that are out of control? Yeah. But when I talk to other people, it's like, oh well, especially when you look at the way that the news frames it, it's usually they put that word peaceful in it. And they say mostly, to be fair, a lot of times they say mostly peaceful protesters, and they conflate that with the people who are doing the riot and vandalizing. So again, I guess, do you see the problem that if you do keep the protest going, that people will keep hiding in the shadows of the good people and keep doing bad things? Do you see that as a problem, or do you think that's just the cost that we have to pay to keep protesting?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think part of it is the cost of protesting. I also think that I also agree that that's wrong. I agree that's wrong, and those people, they should be arrested. But on the other hand, as I was saying at the beginning, you kick a dog long enough, it's going to bite. And I think that's kind of where we're at. It's kind of, it's not kind of, it is. If you keep saying, as I'm repeating, stop killing us. I know there's laws for that, but what happens when you switch that to a police officer and they have things in place where they can't be prosecuted, can't be sued. So now you get okay, the officer illegally killed someone. They weren't committing a crime. The guy was innocent. They killed him. And then they say, well, he was resisting. The video doesn't support he was resisting. Witnesses don't support it. But that officer, nothing happens. Or if they do call him on the carpet, he'll get administrative duty and kept away from the public until they forget. Then they'll either bring him back out or he'll go to a different district.
Yeah, which is what I talked about earlier. They need to make sure that doesn't happen. They have a long sheet of misbehaviors, but because they jump around, it's not as tangible to them, or it's not connected to them as much, so they can get away with doing the same bad behavior just in another town over. Yeah, I'm with that. So what do you think will happen if, say, tomorrow they say, you know what, no more protesting? What bad things do you think will happen if that happens?
I think things will continue. As I think the things that would continue that were going on way before the protest started. Matter of fact, I think it'll get worse.
That's interesting. Because I think things would I think they'll go back the way they were. But as this 50 days of protest, we still see police brutality. We still have had a few more killings. So It's like protesting, sorry, people still dying. Stop the protesting, sorry, people still dying. But the problem with the protesting, it's included with the vandalism, the rioting, and people getting shot who are just innocent bystanders. So I feel like the reason why I say they should stop is not because I don't think that change needs to happen or that I don't believe in the peaceful protest part. It's because I see too much of it being used as a shield to do the bad thing. So if we're going to get the bad thing from the cops and we're not getting as much change, we can stop. Like, even if we stop, like I said, tomorrow with protesting, we can protest again later. Like, I just want a break so that we can stop the constant violent part of the protest, because they keep hiding in the people that are trying to do good things. And the news tries to keep it separate, and people who support Black Lives Matter keep it separate, but they are intertwined. And I want to stop it so that we can reassess it and come back and make sure it's more peaceful. Plus, overall, too, we're supposed to be in the middle of a pandemic, so all this gathering seems like it shouldn't be such a good idea anyway. But that's a whole other subject.
Well,
if you would excuse me, Tyree, I just want to let you guys know that the 15 minutes is up. We can have additional discussion time if you guys feel you need it.
Oh, I want to
add
do
another
the
2 minutes.
rebuttal, and then we can do the ending statement.
Okay. All right, go ahead.
Yeah, so Tyree, go ahead. You about to say?
well, do you think that the violence is more of a part of the protest than the actual protest?
Yes, I mean, and I know it's not all protesters, but I've seen videos of people saying, yes, it is right for us to burn down this stuff, including stuff that's owned by Black people, because, you know, it's us being frustrated. And now buildings, they can be replaced, they're insured. Don't worry about all that. Black people run out of Nike stores with shoes. It's like, oh, don't worry about that. It's like, I am worried about that, because it gives the whole protest this bad look. And we cannot say, oh, that part's okay because we're fighting for justice. We need to call that part out and say, no, separate that. We just want the peaceful part. But because they keep intertwining, we can't. Let's just stop it all. And then we can always protest again in the future. That's why I want to stop to it, just so we can say, hey, that violence stuff is too much. So stop and let everything stop. Then we can protest again later.
See, this is the part we disagree, because I think the peaceful part of the protest is bigger than the violence that's created. And I do agree with you as far as I don't think the violent part at this point is necessary. There shouldn't be shootings, lootings, any of that at this point. I don't agree with that, and the people who are doing it should be arrested, because you're right, it does distract from that. But I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I don't want to say, okay, well, they're doing violence. I don't agree with the violence, but I also don't want to throw away the protest itself, because as we know, Americans, we tend to have a very short attention span. And you stop doing that, and then after a while, we'll be on to something else, especially with, you've got the issue with the inequality of racism. We got the pandemic going. We've got the elections coming up. We just have. So you put all that together, it's a mess.
Yeah.
All right, thank you, gentlemen.
And one last thing, I'll just say I agree that most of the protest is peaceful. Like I said earlier, it's just, even if it's only 10% though, that's doing the bad, it still can make the whole thing look bad. So I do agree with you on that. It's not the majority at all.
Okay.
So to try to stay within our time limit, let's try to keep our closing remarks to 3 minutes each. And we okay with Tyree going first?
Yes, of course.
Okay.
Okay. In my opinion of the situation, I believe the protest should continue, because we still need to bring the attention to the issue, which is police brutality, inequality. Those things need to be forefront, because if we actually step back, I think it allows for people to kind of let it slip their minds. We don't have those uncomfortable conversations. We don't have the comfortable ones anymore. We'll start to hear more from those who think, well, it's really not that bad. I don't know what they're complaining about. Matter of fact, I had a chat with a gentleman who says that Black people have lots of freedom. He doesn't know what the issue is and what they're complaining about. I think that'll become the louder voice if we don't continue. We need to make sure that this is addressed. There are solutions in place. There are things that we can do to help alleviate the problem. We agree that training is one of those things. We agree that reallocation of some of the funds is one of those things. We also talked about voting, getting with our officials, working things out. So there's things that we can do. Yes, it won't 100% clean up everything. It's, nothing's perfect like that. But we can at least put attention on it so that when officers are doing their job, and I'm not talking about the good ones are going to do the right thing. That 10% who are not doing the right thing, hopefully they become a little more, well, wait a minute, maybe I shouldn't do this. And maybe that will help retrain them. I wish things were different. I would really love to go back to what life was like and not see this, not see this inequality, not see the brutality, not see the protests. But this is our life right now. We definitely need to address it. We can't really vary from it. And it benefits everybody.
All right. Thank you, Tyree.
Mm-hmm.
Sherman.
Well, Tyree's overall thing that seems to be is bringing attention. If we stop protesting, then it'll be forgotten, which is a good assumption because Black Lives Matter, I know supporting it. They've come out before after killings and made a lot of noise, like I said, online and marching and protest, but then it faded away. Move on to the next thing. And I agree that it's important to keep this conversation going. I just don't know that it has to be people in the streets to keep it going. And I know that this is different than any other time that they protested because there's been so many companies, like I said before, that come out, showing support, giving their statements, pledging millions of dollars. So I know that we're feeling it this time. You got even little kids on the kids program saying, "Hey, I care about police brutality." So it's definitely different. So if the idea is they have to keep going to keep people talking, I don't agree with that. People are going to keep talking because it's been established in so much of our society right now. Like I even drove in near town, Southfield City, and there's signs of them, Southfield, Black Lives Matter. So even it's in a government issue, not just the social like media and the public supporting it. You've got government supporting it. They painted Black Lives Matter on the street in some cities. So everybody basically is behind it, but there has to be a concise goal to be achieved. It can't just be like we both agree. It can't just be defund the police. Not only that, ridiculous at its extreme interpretation, but even just allocating it's like okay, we have to say how much, we have to say what it goes to. It can't just be a feel-good statement like no justice, no peace. We get that. It has to be tangible stuff. So we can talk and protest and what bothers me about the some of the government officials, like even our governor in Michigan, she went out protesting with Black Lives Matter, but I don't see that as a good thing. We vote you to make changes. We don't need you to protest. We need you in the office making some changes so that we can feel better and safer. So any of these governors and government officials who get praised for going out and marching, no, your job is to make something happen. So that's why the idea of voting is kind of like, okay, I like the idea of voting, but it's not even promised the changes we made. It's the best my governor can offer is, see, I support you. I put on a mask and go out and protest. No, do something on paper that's tangible. Show me that you really care with the job that you're elected to do. So I agree. Protests have made changes, and most of it is peaceful. But because I've seen an extreme case, an 8-year-old girl shot, don't know if it's a protest for sure, but I know it created the environment where people are emboldened to lock down certain areas and use their weapons in a way that they know they won't get in trouble by cops, and people won't rat them out because there's this whole movement against cops. So until peaceful protesters start calling out those who aren't, I want it all to end.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. Our time is up. I appreciate your joining me today. Appreciate your taking the time to discuss these matters that are important for everybody, and I know are personally very important for you. So I will hope to continue this conversation, and until next time, thank you again.
You're welcome. I enjoyed it.
It was fun. Yeah, I enjoyed it too. Better than I thought. Nice talking to you guys.
All right.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.